What is indisputable is that love is integral for living. There's medical evidence to show that being in love is beneficial to our health. The Beatles' song by John and Paul were on the money when they wrote the song, "All You Need Is Love." And that delightful film, Love Actually, debuted in 2003, is repeated every Christmas time, every Advent season on TV. The word love is commonplace in Christian circles and in Western society. But what is the word? But is the word always used in the same sense? What do we Christians mean when we talk about love? I looked up the synonyms for love. I got 6 categories: deep affection, liking, compassion, beloved, relationship, and best wishes. Sparsely scattered through the many words for love were the words care, concern, and charity. The weight of the synonyms focus on romantic love, friendship love, and the love of things. And I would argue, my friends, we commonly use the word love in the sense of liking someone or something. So what do we hear when we hear Jesus talking about the 2 principal commands of loving God and loving our neighbour as ourselves? Yes, you would say, I'm sure, that you like God. I would give you that, but I would also add, do we always like God? More importantly, do you like your neighbour? Do you like all your neighbours? This is getting a bit difficult. What about yourself? Do you like yourself? I guess we'll leave that one for our conversation with the psychologist, or once more sweep it under the carpet. Let's then turn to Mark's Gospel and his account. Mark has put several instances where the Pharisees, the religious leaders, have come along to listen, to question, and to test him, if not to trap him. In chapters 10 to 12, all these instances are put together. They are quite plausible, very credible, because here is this popular preacher. They needed to test him. Was he going to upset the political equilibrium between the Jews and the Romans? So they naturally tested Jesus and tried to trap him. Mark shows that in all these encounters, Jesus outsmarts his adversaries. And Jesus does this not by good spin doctoring, but by sticking to the principles of the faith, by focusing on what is right and the essence of what it means to be a follower of God. Jesus has a deep integrity which holds fast to the key principles of the faith. Love God, love your neighbour as yourself. In our reading today, we have a religious leader who was impressed with Jesus' responses. He is not the only religious leader that looked at Jesus positively. What is the principal of the commandments? He asked Jesus. In his words, which command is the most important of all? Now, Jesus doesn't answer with 1 but 2 commandments, or are they just one? First, Jesus recites the Shema, found in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Every faithful Jew would begin each day with these words, the recital of the Shema, which are, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." And we might note that Jesus added with all your mind. Within the first hour of each day, I recite the Lord's Prayer. It centers my thoughts. It reminds me to whom I belong. Whatever follows that day, whether faithfulness or unfaithfulness, there are thoughts about God's blessing at the beginning and usually at the end. The Lord's Prayer is the principal expression of my spirituality. When Jesus followed the command to love your neighbor as yourself, he wasn't introducing a new commandment. He was completing the Shema. For to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul also means that you are to love God's world. And to love God's world is to love God. So this command, this principle of faith, is to love God and our neighbour as ourselves. And the writer of 1 John puts it well in the negative. He says, "Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love." If you don't know God's world, if you don't love God's world, you don't love God. It's as simple as that. The way I see this, and I use for myself an image to understand this commandment. I say it as one command, to love God and your neighbour and yourself. I use the equilateral triangle. It's my little diagram of the faith, the important part of the faith, the essence of the faith. At each angle, put the words God, neighbour, self. You can turn the triangle around and have self at the top and God and neighbour. It doesn't matter where they are. There's a line that connects all the corners. That line is symbolic of the love that flows between God, neighbour, and self. Or self-God, or self-neighbour God. For me to love my neighbour, because in all honesty, I don't always like all my neighbours. I don't always know them, so I can't say I like or dislike them. But in all honesty, for me to do that, I need to love God first and let God love me. And that tells me God does not make trash, as that little saying goes. So I'm not trash. I'm worthy. I'm worthy of God's love. God deems me worthy. That makes me enables me to love my neighbour, to love others, and those who I find awkward or difficult. Did you know that the phrase, love your neighbour as yourself, is mentioned 18 times in the Bible? The Christian Bible, Old and New Testaments, as we call them. Did you know that 16 of those 18 verses are all in the New Testament, which suggests to us that the early Christians got it? Love was important. It was number one. In fact, there's a lot of evidence in real life that that was a fact for them. The other two instances are found in the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures. In this chapter 19 of Leviticus, which you read, to love our neighbours as ourselves, we are told. We find these two references there, and we might think that the Old Testament doesn't put a lot of weight on this command to love our neighbours. But this instruction to love our neighbour comes in a section describing in detail what it means to be a follower of God in that early period when those slaves out of Egypt moved into what we know as Canaan or Palestine. They settled in a land alongside of other people. They were farmers. The Israelites were herdsmen. They saw the productivity of the land, and they saw their worship. Their worship was a worship of a fertility god. And so the acts of worship simulated sexual acts, fertility acts. And that involved temple prostitution, sex with the same gender, sex with animals. It's all there. It's an interesting little chapter to read. But in all this, God is saying to them, God alone is your God. God is a holy God, expects holiness. Don't do these things. But importantly, we have there this phrase, love your neighbour as yourself. And then quite a few verses down, we get the same syntax, but the word neighbour has been changed now to alien or foreigner. I love the word alien. Aliens don't belong here. They're not part of my tribe, not part of my family. But God says, love them. Love the alien, the sojourner, the foreigner in your land, as all the others there. This instruction to love the poor and the alien or the strangers is mentioned in chapter 19 of Leviticus, but it also has a practical outcome. We find there are 19 verses that are similar, but now what has been said is, you will provide for the orphan, the widow, and the alien. You will leave bits of your fields unharvested so they can glean. You will have a poor collection for those people. You will look after them. So clearly, there was a very practical expression to understanding God's love in their society for both friend and foe, for family member and stranger. You may see now that loving your neighbour has nothing to do with liking them. Christian love is not about liking someone or something. It is about a deep-seated value of caring and taking responsibility to share with others the Creator's blessings. I'm sure, as I reflected on this passage, that if the writers of Leviticus were writing those chapters today, they would replace all the stuff about fertility cults and sexual practices and instructions about climate change, refugees, and materialism. These are the issues that we need to address today as the men and women of God. My Christian friends, I find the Christian faith very simple, yet profound. It's all about loving God, self and others. And it's all about loving God, self and others. Others include the whole of creation. Our faith is not about regulations and right doctrine, but about love for everyone and everything. It's calling us to responsibility for others in this world and for the world itself. By coming to the well of God's love in worship, in reflection, and the camaraderie of the fellowship, we learn how to love. We may feel helpless in this world, and that sometimes we do, but we can do some things. We can pray for our political leaders, especially at Glasgow at this time, and that climate change conference. We can start by empathizing with the marginalized, the refugees, the ignored, the homeless, the poor. We can speak about these major concerns that affect this world and us and our neighbours. And we can agitate and keep listening and speaking. Our conversations should be peppered with these issues, with gracious listening and conversation. This is the wonder of the Christian faith. Just love God, love your neighbour, and love yourself. Amen.